Welcome back to the Railroad Report, where I highlight for you a selection of stories both new and old from across Railroad. As I continue to workshop the formula for this series, today we're doing our first themed episode. Previously, it's just been whatever stories I happen to pick. Today I bring you fanfics, specifically Pokémon fanfics. Most of what gets posted on Railroad is original content, but some fanworks do get made. Usually as cross-posts from AO3, space battles, or sufficient velocity, but not always. Some fandoms are a lot more popular across the site than others, and Pokémon is definitely one of those. There's a lot to get hung up on about with Pokémon fanfics, since each of them takes a different approach to how they handle Pokémon power levels, evolutions, the level of danger in the world, whether there's new moves or not, and a whole host of other things that come from taking a game world and trying to make it real. I'm pretty sure there's a whole video I could make about the differences in approach between lit RPG making up game mechanics for original worlds and game fanfics almost always ditching them. But I don't want to go too deep on those details, so I'll avoid spoilers and just give you a light overview of each fanfic. First up, we have Borne of Caution by Fogman, one of the most popular fanfics on the site. This one is an isekai where after a rather scarring death, our main character, Lee Henson, wakes up in a field in the Pokémon world. With the usual advantages of having played the Pokémon games extensively, he quickly gets himself set up and heads out on a journey as a Pokémon trainer. This story certainly earns its popularity as it is very well written. It follows the traditional route for Pokémon fics, with Lee's journey being a regular gym circuit. Along the way, he captures Pokémon, meets interesting people, and grows as a person. As far as being a Pokémon fanfic goes, it takes place in Hoenn and includes major characters. Brandon Birch joins Lee on his journey, and they encounter Team Magma and Aqua along the way. We see some popular Pokémon on Lee's team like his Vulpix that shows up right at the beginning, as well as Pokémon from other regions. The series takes a more serious approach, with Pokémon being fairly powerful and quite dangerous, and there is the threat of death here and there. Lee himself deals with some pretty serious issues, including recurring PTSD. That and other emotional moments I think are handled very well and are one of the things that makes this such a good story. But besides that, a lot of it is fairly light-hearted and an overall fun Pokémon journey. Next up is New Beginnings, a Pokémon slice of life by Less Gently. This story also has our main character suddenly finding himself in the Pokémon world, though he has some initial difficulties getting himself set up. Once he is though, the story unfolds into a very casual affair as expected of a slice of life. Instead of the traditional gym circuit, the main character, Ethan Reed, decides he's not suited for battling and instead opts to set up a ranch where he runs a few Pokémon-related businesses. Most Pokémon fanfics are pretty heavily battle-focused, to no one's surprise, so this one is a little different from the get-go. I think it goes a little harder on the wish fulfillment aspects of a fanfic, with a lot of things just kind of working out, but it doesn't lean into it too hard, and with some troubles along the way makes for a nice reading overall. The opening can give a more serious impression, but that's not the vibe of the story overall. This is definitely something more relaxed for people who don't want their Pokémon fanfics too serious. The story takes place in Sinnoh and treats Pokémon as reasonably dangerous, but it's hard to gauge power in a non-battle focused story. There's less I can say here recommendation-wise, since a slice-of-life story will succeed or fail for you based on whether you like the characters. Give it a look and see what you think. The Type Specialist by Incarnated Wisp is one of the rarer completed works of fiction on Railroad. As with so many Pokémon fanfics, it's also an isekai. After being rather unceremoniously dumped in an alley in Johto, Alex spends some time getting his bearings and making friends before he decides to be a Pokémon trainer and heads off to complete a gym circuit in Hoenn. As the title states, Alex decides to specialize and starts catching Fairy-type Pokémon. A goal he doesn't deviate from, with the exception of one Pokémon that can Mega Evolve to be a fairy. Not knowing how serious of a story he is in, Alex does spend a fair amount of time paranoid over what kind of danger the knowledge he has might put him in, which eventually expands the plot from doing gyms to also including dealing with a few criminal organizations here and there, but training his Pokemon does continue to be the primary focus. I think one thing Type Specialist does particularly well is balancing how much of an advantage the pre-Isekai knowledge is. Alex certainly makes use of it and grows faster as a result, but he's only strong as a result, not overwhelmingly strong. Pokemon Trainer Vicky by Ceres is the first of the isekais on our list that's a reincarnation instead of a cross-world teleport. Victoria Ferris is reincarnated from our world into her household in Kanto, and we join her story not long before she sets out on her Pokemon journey to complete a gym circuit. Different fics will set the age at which kids can go on their journeys differently, but here it's 10, so rather than the usual isekai method of skipping childhood, we join her as a kid. Despite being technically older, she does act like a child in many ways. A more knowledgeable and somewhat more responsible one, but still a kid. Vicky firmly believes that a world runs on the power of friendship, and since it's a Pokemon world, she's right. There are goals and things Vicky strives for, but they really take second place to her desire to just enjoy herself in a world of Pokemon. The story describes itself as a slice of life, but while there are certainly slower bits and a lot of moments of the regular day-to-day, I feel like the mere presence of Pokemon and battling them means that there's really too much action for that to be quite right. Nonetheless, it is a much more casual and low-stakes story. There's some conflict and a plot to be followed, but never any real worry that things won't work out for Vicky. That doesn't make it any less interesting to read, however, and if you simply like Pokemon and want to see them interacted with, you'll find a great variety here. For a much newer story than others on the list, we have Shadowed Knowledge by Foxan. This one, just like Pokemon Trainer Vicky, describes itself as a slice of life, and I think it's even less true than before. Maybe I just find reading about Pokemon too interesting, but with a constant focus on battling and training, not to mention criminal organizations, Pokemon secrets, and deciding what otherworldly knowledge to share, there's just too much going on here for the slower-paced casual lightheartedness that is usual for Slice of Life. We follow Jace, who wakes up injured in a forest and is rescued by some Pokemon. He learns that he's ended up in Kalos, and that he has the ability to understand exactly what Pokemon are saying as if they were speaking English. After meeting with Professor Sycamore and exchanging some information, in typical Pokemon fashion he's told, "That's pretty groundbreaking, now here's some Pokeballs, get out there." I really do love how in so many Pokemon isekais, everyone's reaction to someone stumbling in from another world is just, "Sounds rough, have you tried catching Pokemon about it?" And so he does, rapidly accruing a whole menagerie of different Pokemon, while getting into every sort of trouble imaginable along the way. The story is still in its early days, so it's hard to comment on what it will focus on. There is a promise of competing in the Kalos Gym Circuit and League later on, but at the start that is a little while away, and the focus is on meeting and helping Pokemon and side questing. Or I guess at this stage it's the main quest, Alola. Where the Moon Rises by Fuwami is the first non-isekai on our list. This story focuses on Arin Watanuki. Originally from Johto, he left and travelled the world before eventually settling in Paldea. A message from his estranged father, however, calls him back to his hometown where he becomes gym leader and sets out to form the Indigo League's first fairy-type gym. This is one that when I first started it, I surprisingly thought I might end up dropping. Arin seemed to have every advantage under the sun in his favour, and it felt a little over the top. Fortunately, the author pulled it off and built a world with challenges to meet him. He's still very powerful from the get-go, but so are his allies and his enemies. While hopeful in tone, this is a slightly darker fic with more serious elements, and the central conflict is pretty high stakes. Besides Arin's struggles to get his gym established, he and all the members of the Indigo League have to contend with a Team Rocket that presents a far greater threat than normal. And last but most certainly not least, there is I Will Touch the Skies by Susoni. This one is complicated to talk about because I have the strongest personal opinions on it. First, to summarize, the story follows Grace Pastel, a 15-year-old girl in Sinnoh who thought she wasn't interested in heading out on a Pokemon journey. She discovers that it's more appealing than she thought and heads out to challenge the gyms with a newfound friend. Along the way she meets more friends, some enemies, and encounters both adventure and dangers. This version of a Pokemon world is one of the darkest and most dangerous, with Pokemon being extremely powerful and wild ones, and sometimes trainer ones, being quite willing to kill. The story is tagged Grimdark, and that tag was paid for in blood. The blurb claims that Noble Dark would be a better tag, and I agree with the sentiment. This is not a story where good must falter in the end. The heroes do tend to ultimately win, but they don't all make it, and the ones that do are dragging themselves across the finish line in a bloody mess. The dangers start fairly small, with wild Pokemon encountered along the way, but grow over time. Stronger Pokemon, people with bad intentions, and eventually criminal groups. Things escalate and keep escalating and never go back down. Victories are minor and hard fought, losses hurt, and there are fewer and fewer moments of peace, to the extent that eventually I decided to drop the series, which is tragic because as far as I'm concerned it's the best Pokemon fanfic, and among just the best fanfics full stop that I have ever read. The world building takes the Pokemon canon and adjusts it in a way that feels incredibly well put together. The characters have strong personalities and interesting dynamics. The Pokemon battles are incredibly well written. Despite how much I like the plot, I think it has to be the fights that are the highlight of the entire thing for me. I've enjoyed some other serious stories like those by author Walbo, but similarly when I was reading Pact, there came a point where I simply wasn't willing to trudge through the misery any further. After hundreds of thousands of words, I liked the characters too much to spend hundreds of thousands more watching them suffer with little hope that they'd get anything approaching a reward in the end. I think there's probably a reason a lot of dark stories are short. If you have a tolerance for that kind of thing, I highly recommend reading this one because it is simply incredible. And that's a wrap for today. I've read more of Pokemon fanfics than this, and there are many more that I haven't read to be found on Royal Road. So if you're a fan of Pokemon and these didn't quite tickle your fancy, have a look and you might find something you like the look of.